Morning YouTube. With some parts. Figured I'd chat away while stuff's on my mind. Hopefully you can hear this good, but I was hoping to I think I'll make a couple of videos talking about my thoughts and opinions on the different truck brands, reliability in the years that were good and the years that didn't seem to be as good. My grandpa's gonna watch this. All right. Anyways, I'm just gonna go with Ford for the first one because I'm a Ford guy. I'm a Ford guy through trial and error, not by default. My dad owned all kinds of different stuff. My grandpa was kind of more of a Chevy guy, but had a Dodge for most of my life, and we all know those are two very influential powers on what makes your purchasing decisions throughout a lot of your life later. But anyways, I've had the best luck with Fords. We'll go back to kind of, let's start with the 90s. There's still a lot of guys running 90s era trucks on the road. So the 90s Ford did pretty good. They had the 460. That was a tried and true engine. That engine basic design was in production for a long time. I think it came out in the 60s even. I can't remember. Anyways, they had the 460 for the gas. They had the 5.8 liter. There was a 351 Cleveland. I can't remember where the 90s 351s were made. Those were also a good engine. You had the 5.0, good engine. In today's standards, none of them were huge powerhouses. However, the 460 torque numbers are still, you're over 400 foot-pounds, especially later towards 97. I had a 97 with a 460. That sucker ran. That was there was something, that truck was, I'm a tangent here, but that truck was a kind of pieced together. It was a cab swap. I bought it kind of like this, but it was an automatic. When I bought it, I swapped it to a 5-speed, and turned out to be a cool truck, and it ran so good. It got, whoops. I'm going to wedge you back in here in my engine manual so hopefully you guys can see. Anyways, that truck ran real good. It even got like 13 miles a gallon, which is almost unheard of for a 460. And then you had the 7.3 IDIs in the 90s. The 6.9s were in the 80s. 7.3 IDI, when they turboed it factory, had one of those. That was a good running truck for what it was. It wasn't a big power or anything, but man, it ran good. Shouldn't have sold that one. That was a nice old truck. I've had a few of the Power Strokes, early 7.3 Power Strokes. Those were also good engines. That was an international engine, so it was the IDI. So Ford had a purchasing deal with the International Navistar division starting back in the 80s with the 6.9 liter, which was a pretty good engine. It's never a shining star at anything. They were reliable, but they were leaky. Always had a lot of blow-by just from being high compression. They're like 21.5 to 1 if I remember right. Anyways, good motor, nothing too crazy. You had the 5 speeds coming into the 90s. The early ones were 4 speeds. I don't know if they were board ordered or what they were. Then you hit the ZF5, great transmission. Dana axles, great axles. And then you get into the E4OD came out as a revision of the AOD. I can't remember the one before that. And that's in the 90s is when you start seeing more pickups get sold with automatics and manuals, and that transition starts to begin there. The E4OD had some places where it could be desired, but they could be rebuilt and made better very cheap. I've always had them, and I've always put shift kits in them, and it just made them a way better transmission. Then they revised that once again, and it became the 4R100 with minor differences, but basically the same transmission, same case and stuff. And now it's behind the later 7.3s in the 2000s, and then 99 hits, and then we hit the Triton era of engines. So we get the 5.4, and we get the 6.8 V10. Both good engines. They have their goofy little spark plug issues. They're not cheap rebuilders, but for the most part, you didn't have to rebuild them very often. If you did any maintenance at all, you were going to be okay. And the spark plug dilemma is one of those dilemmas that is a huge mountain of a problem if you are a subpar mechanic, but there are so many kits. I've had to do it before, so many kits to do it, and it's really, even in a worst case scenario, it's not that, hasn't been that bad, at least on the early ones. I've never had to do anything with the spark plugs on the later Tritons. But then they revised it to a different spark plug design, which kind of created a different problem. But that was a shortcoming they had, but nonetheless, nothing that is not overcomable, and still at the end of the day, a reasonably cheap repair if it goes sideways on you. So you've got that era begins, and then you hit the end of the 7.3s. 7.3s were great, but like any engine that is 440 cubic inches and 215 horsepower, I can't remember, I think the final year was 275. But they were great engines. They were huge displacement. They weren't great on fuel. They were okay. They weren't great on fuel. Great engine. The injection design was a design that International bought directly from Caterpillar. There's interchangeable injectors that you can buy from Cat. I think you're 7.3. So that's why that design worked so well. And now it's also had to do with the beginnings of emissions. So they got rid of pump line and nozzles, which was the IDIs, mechanical injection pump, go to electronic controlled HU injection system. International buys that design from Cat. It went well. Cat's engineers are usually quite good at what they do. That was a good engine. And then we revised that engine into the 6-liter once again. Kind of a more European design with cartridge filters, an EGR, and an updated HUI system, which they put way more joints in it than they should have. They got rid of some head studs. But overall, a good performing engine. You guys have heard me say this before, the 6-liter they have their issues. I like them. They're overcomable. I like them because they're cheap, and they do run pretty hard if you can keep them together. You just have to have a brain to do it. And so that's when you start to get into, that's when diesels across the board started to get more expensive to maintain. Parts became more refined, emissions sets in, and things become much more in depth. And then the 6-liter. The reason I really like the 6-liters is mostly the running gear, the transmission, the axles, and the cab. They are the best work trucks you can buy. Ford still carries the axles and stuff and that suspension design to this day. They've updated the transmission, but that transmission essentially had a run for almost 20 years because the 6R140 was close to the 5R110 too, I believe. It's a planetary design transmission. It's essentially a rip-off of an Allison 1000, but it is way better than an Allison 1000. And you almost do nothing to them, ever. Like, you don't even have to change the fluid if you don't want. You just go. And so that era of trucks, especially like the one I'm driving right now, is 2009 V10, so the 360 some horsepower with the 5R110, and I love this thing. I bought it for another employee of mine to drive. He went and did something different, which is fine, and so I've been driving it, and I like the crap out of this thing. I've got another V10 with a 5R in Andy's truck that he drives. It's been a great truck, but we've only put 12,000 miles on it this year. Haven't had it very long, but nonetheless, you get into the running gear and stuff like that, and that's when Ford really started to shine. They had the shortcomings of the 6-liter. The 6.4 was essentially a nightmare, and even from what I understand from the best mechanics that work on those things, they're hard to put together and keep them reliable. Like, you can fix a 6-liter and make a good engine out of it. There's a lot of weird things they did to the 6.4 that I'm not going to get into too specifically that makes it hard to count on. But they ran great. Boy, they made a lot of power, and they got pretty good fuel mileage, and everything behind the 6.4 was wonderful. But they had their problems. But during all this time, the Triton engine is doing well. I don't like them as much as the LS Chevys. Obviously, the LS Chevys is, although the V10, sorry, it's getting goofy. The road's getting bad out here. The V10 will outrun the LS in a towing competition, without a doubt. But either way, it's just a little bigger, things like that. But the Triton engines were pretty good, and they finally quit them. So the Triton engine had a 20-year production run. They made them clear in like, I think 22 when they finally quit. No, 20 when they finally quit them. So 99 to 20. Anyways, you've got those. You've got bigger brakes than the Dodges. I don't know about the Chevys. I never really compared them directly. But just the cabs. I mean, I've owned 400,000 mile Ford pickups that were still better and quieter, and the dashes were intact than most Chevys and Dodges of the comparable year, and so of half as many miles. And so that's another deal for me, is that just the cab quality. The doors shut. We never have door latch problems. They don't come unhooked. The window motors work forever. Stuff like that I've done a lot of repair work on in other brands starts to stand out. The quality of the wiring in a Ford pickup is, I can't tell you how many times I've worked on Dodge wiring problems. It's insane. That's a rabbit hole conversation for another day. But I'm just shooting you straight on the things I've seen, and I just have the best luck with Fords. I really do. I think the Cummins engine is the best diesel engine in a pickup. I like it more than all of the Ford diesels. However, I don't like it enough to deal with the other BS that Dodge puts you through. So here we are running Fords. So then we get out of the 6.4. Ford breaks ties with International, because really what International did was put them in a really bad spot with people buying them and reliability in the diesels, and it gave them a bad run for 2003 to 2010. So a 7-year production run where Ford was probably the least desirable engine, because those other comparable years Cummins was doing pretty good and Chevy was doing pretty good, and so that was a tough few years to compete with. So then Ford comes out with the Ford 6.7 as a true Ford engine, made it to a true Ford transmission with Ford axles. And the thing that I think that this is, in my opinion, when Ford really caught their stride. Everything in that truck was designed by engineers employed by the same company. Dodge cannot say that, and GM cannot say that. I think GM can't still. It's an Isuzu engine. The Duramax is an Isuzu engine. In the Dodge, you've got a Cummins engine with either Dodge's POS 68 RFE transmission or the Toyota-built Aisin transmission, which is a great transmission, but a $5,000 add-on if you would like your truck to be reliable. So Ford has got all their engineers working in the same building to put these trucks together. They still run the CP4. I don't like that, but I rarely even hear of those becoming issues in those, because Ford's supporting fuel system is awesome. It's got everybody beat by a mile. And the 6R140 transmission was just as tough as they get. I mean, the only time you saw them come apart is with high horsepower tuning and poor drivers. They just ran, and you had the horsepower to back them up, and they were awesome. And so since 2011, Ford has built the best truck on the market by a mile, an absolute mile. And so they've had that going for them. And then, what time is it? You're right on schedule. Anyways, they've had that going for them. And then you get into Dodge is still at this time wrestling with transmissions. They're still running the 68 today. They tried the 8-speed for a little bit, but from what I understand, you can't even get that anymore behind the Cummins, because it is still unreliable and a turd. Ford has designed a 10-speed, which has been the Super Duty 10-speed, has been good. I do know they've had problems with the 10-speed in the F-150s and the Rangers, but we're here to talk heavy-duty trucks. I've had 2 of those trucks with 10 speeds. They've been great. Then they came out with the 7.3 Godzilla. It did great. Oh, and the 6.2 came out in 2011. Still a modular family, the modular engine family is the Tritons. It's kind of a relative to that, but it was awesome. They fixed the spark plug issues. There was no cam phaser problems, nothing. It ran and ran and ran forever. So it didn't matter what you bought, whether you bought the diesel or the gas Ford, you were bound for reliability, and you're going to have a good time. And then the 10-speed comes out. They bump the horsepower up on the 6.7 Power Stroke, and they just don't have any problems. They don't have a bunch of stupid recalls. Dodge can never get away from the recalls. GM's new 10-speed transmission that was not built with Fords, to make that clear, is a turd. It rivals the 68 from what I understand. And yeah, this is very light across the top. If you want to hear more about each specific engine and what I think of them in transmission or year range, I can do that. But anyways, I gotta go pick up my drive shaft. Vance says hi. Thanks for watching.